that was a tour de force. And not many people, although I said he couldn't carry on and on, but in fact, very few people could have got so much information across so well, so totally accurately, so persuasively, in such a relatively short time. And I'll be even shorter because I shall say that that was what we've really heard is a history of systemic failure. Višnja.
How short should I be? As shorter as possible. Okay, I will try. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We have heard of my colleagues a lot of horrors of communism today. Because I'm not a historian, I will try to tell you something about the communism. We've heard about communism in past. I will try to tell you something about the communism in Croatia today. Actually, the main topic will be one question. And the question is, how did it happen that today, more than 30 years after the fall of communism, we know so little or so insufficiently about the crimes of the communist regime and its totalitarian nature? And how did it happen that public mainstream today is dominated by a narrative that excuses the crimes and totalitarian practices of the Communist Party, or even glorifies it as an anti-fascist struggle? So I will try to offer some answers, keeping in mind the Croatian case. The very short, but I think substantial answer is, it has been happening because the old communist elites and their descendants still rule the country. And they have made very systematic efforts to keep the truth about the nature of the communist regime hidden, and how they did so and what they did to do so. First of all, they did, and they still do their best to obstruct and to prevent any appropriate researching of the concealed mass graves. I think that Stjepo said that in Croatia situation is a bit better than in Slovenia, if I'm not wrong. I invite you for a coffee after the conference these days. So there were two major political efforts to research and excavate mass graves in Croatian soul. The first one happened during the war in the 1990s, and it was seriously obstructed because some of leading officers of the communist secret police who organized the executions or directly participated in the executions kept the influential positions of even became very prominent members of the new government. Like persons like Josip Manolić, connected with mass executions in Bjelovar region in 1945, or less known, Ivica Fizir, directly responsible for the mass executions in Macelj Hill, which is the biggest complex of mass graves in Croatia. Approximately 100,000 people were executed and buried in mass graves only in Macelj Hills. During the 90s, he was župan. He was head of province of Krapina. After former Communist Party, under the new name, ironically, Party for Democratic Changes, came back to power in 1900, they simply killed the Parliamentary Commission and stopped the researches. The second attempt happened 10 years later. In 2011, when the office assigned to find and excavate mass graves of victims of the communist regime was established in Croatian parliament. Established by bill. And the bill was adopted by political, which is important, by political consensus of two major parties, then ruling HDZ and party then in opposition, Social Democrats. And it happened on the eve of the new parliamentary elections. Left-wing coalition led by Social Democrats won the elections. And as soon as they come to power, they decided to abolish the office. I joined the office from the very first day. I was in charge of developing the researching program of excavating mass graves. So I'm sort of a witness of the methods they have used in order to prevent any research and to shut down the office. But we were quite stubborn too. We were only 5. We knew that we do not have long-term perspective, but what we wanted to do is to excavate at least 1, 2, 3 mass graves to show that they exist. So I went to neighboring Slovenia to see Jože Dežman, he is not here, I think, and to ask him how to do it. There was a couple of very useful suggestions he told to me, but I still remember his words. Do it as quick as possible. When the skeletons start coming out of the ground, the bones will do the further job. The bones will tell the story. So we did so. In the private garden, in the northern residential part of Zagreb, we excavated from the hidden mass grave the skeletons of dozen young guys killed in May 1945. Pathologists said all of them were at the edge of maturity. And it is true, the bones start telling the story. So, when you see their so perfectly white teeth, completely preserved, when you see then one of them was holding the gold crisis pendant in a clenched fist before he was shot, it really tells the story. But I didn't hear today, even not from Jože, how felt those people who had mass graves in their gardens. And I talked to those people. You know, it was such a relief for them. Can you imagine a person who has in his own garden mass grave of 20, 10, 30 people, and he cannot touch it for 45 years. They kept it intact in the shadow of their gardens, and they felt great relief when we finally excavated. But actually, we succeeded to excavate just 3 of them, because the opposite side, I mean the communist network, they also knew very well that the bones tell the stories, and then they decided to abolish the office. So by the end of the year, it was 2012, by the end of the year, we had prepared about 50 mass graves and 100 additional to further research. And at that time, they simply abolished the office by the law. And in order to improve it, of course, they moved it to the Ministry of Veterans under direct political control. And not even that. Moreover, the head of the department was former high official of UDBA, very professional one, as I said, and very experienced one, I can confirm you. And moreover, he was not just high-ranked official of UDBA, he also liked to emphasize that very proudly that he passed through Pančevo Academia. And you know what Pančevo Academia is? Pančevo Academia is academia led by former military intelligence of GNA, of Communist Army, and famous persons who passed through this particular academia were famous terrorists of PLO, people from Red Brigades from Germany, and a lot of executors of UDBA later on. So this person was at head of the researches. Of course, all the researches were stopped. He is retired, but afterwards no significant research was made. They escalate from time to time some grave, but it's more to close the story than to open the story. But there is slight difference in approach to mass graves between two main political parties, center-right HDZ and left ex-communist Social Democratic Party. HDZ does nothing to open the research of mass graves, and Social Democrats, ex-communist, does everything to stop any idea about it. That is the difference. What is interesting, about the same time, in 2013, the excavations and researches were politically stopped in Slovenia, Serbia, and Croatia at the same year. Until then, Serbia, and particularly Slovenia, and Jože presented us, did much more researches than Croatia. Actually, Croatia did so little, almost nothing so far. And about the same time, the renewed anti-fascist narrative started to spread very aggressively. That basically means to minimize the crimes of communism as occasional events or understandable revenge, rather than planned, organized, systematic crimes, and to deny the totalitarian nature of the communist regime. And that was very close to the narrative of the great anti-fascist victory spread by Russia and its president, Vladimir Putin. The next efficient tool to stop research of crimes and totalitarian nature of communism is control over the archives. My colleagues, historians, know about this matter much more, but briefly, the most sensitive portions of the archives of the communist secret police in Croatia were destroyed during the transitional period. After the first free elections in the springtime 1990, and before the HDZ, the party that won the elections, took the power. Besides, there was no lustration in Croatia, and that's a very important obstacle to any research. Actually, persons who played a significant role in the communist secret police and who certainly took part in its criminal activities after the first free elections took powerful positions in the new government. After HDZ took power in early 90s, Josip Manolić, one of those persons, performed the duties of Prime Minister, Minister of Interior, and he was the key person in establishing Croatian secret services. And he was not the only one. A lot of officers, employees, and of course a lot of their secret collaborators and secret agents remained in the system and are still there, either they or their children. It was in their interest that in archives remain as long as tightly closed as possible. There were always some reasons why. At the beginning, the reason was not to provoke internal social conflict during the war, and now the reason is to protect the GDPR to protect the persons. Actually, you are protecting more the perpetrators than you protect the victims. Third source, very important, about complete knowledge of the nature of communist regime could be the oral history. But we have never heard the proper voice of the victims of communism through their own testimonies. They do not appear in the mainstream media. Their stories are not told in the novels or movies. In my experience, very often, people hesitated or were even afraid to testify about the crimes of communism which happened 70 years ago. When I asked them why, the usual answer was, they are all around. In the police, in the ministries, they are the judges. I have to think about my grandchildren. They no longer fear for their physical life, but they do not want to jeopardize the careers and the opportunities of their grandchildren. On the other hand, nobody is institutionally interested in hearing their story. Following a very important tool for controlling the narrative on communism is the control of elites, especially the control over social and intellectual elite. And communists were always very good at that. At the very beginning, starting from the first revolutionary period of time, they almost completely eliminated old non-communist Croatian elite by physical elimination, by persecution, and ban of work, and significant part of Croatian elite ended up abroad in foreign countries like Argentina or United. One minute more. Okay. So, I will jump over some portions. So, let's go to the new Zagreb government, neo-communist government. So, they came with joint agenda, with green agenda, and on the bottom there was an old communist ideology. And recently they decided to make the street Zagreb more anti-fascist. So, as the first step, they made up a list of the names of people who no longer deserve to have streets in Zagreb, because in their view, they were collaborators of the pro-Nazi regime of the independent state of Croatia during World War II. But in their view, collaborator is everyone who lived in Zagreb at that time, especially if he was intellectual, especially if he was artist, if he was person of prestige and integrity. So they put, actually, on this list of fascists and collaborators of fascism, they put the people, the prominent personalities of Croatian national culture, who were also the victims of communism. So, amongst them, there was, I will tell you just one example, amongst those collaborators was a Croatian Catholic writer and university professor, Petar Grgec. I do not know who knows here who was Petar Grgec. You know. Okay. You should know, but I will spread it. So Petar Grgec was, as I said, a Catholic intellectual, university professor, writer. And what they did, this collaborator was doing during the independent state of Croatia during the Holocaust. He was well known as a man who used to take his hat off and bowed before every person who wore a Jewish sign in the streets of Zagreb at that time. But after political show trial, after communists took the power, they sentenced him to 7 years of hard prison with forced labor. They put in prison his teenage son for 4 years. They took away his political rights. They took away his house. They erased him completely from literature. They took away his right to work for a life. And he was not even allowed to publish poetry under his own name. And do you know who is Vladimir Ranogajec, who has still the street in Zagreb? Who knows? You know. You do. So, Vladimir Ranogajec was the judge of the Communist Military Court, who in 1945 signed dozens of death sentences for enemies of the people, and they were executed. So, as we can see in the way the new political party, consisting of old communists on the ground and their children on the surface, called Možemo or Podemos, as we can see in the way they rule Zagreb, communist regime and its totalitarian nature does not belong to the past and should not be closed. On the contrary, it should be opened and researched, and the lessons should be learned. Otherwise, new adapted forms of communism associated with globalist agendas could become a future. And it is not just the empty phrase to finish the speech because Robin told me so. It is it is a real danger. So I put it a bit shorter, but I think we have really time for that.